This is the most brutal experiment in the history of science because all the test subjects were living human beings. When a Bose condensate cools to absolute zero, it transcends the solid, liquid and gaseous states and transforms into another substance, the Bose-Einstein condensate. It presents an extraordinary phenomenon that transcends nature, and now, humans have successfully created a weapon using this technology called Spectre. Spectre not only can ignore all human weapons but also possesses special abilities like wall penetrating and flight. Moreover, they wield immense power. Even the mightiest of human ground war machines are reduced to heaps of scrap metal under Spectre's attacks. What's more, the human eye cannot see them. Only with a hyperspectral camera can Spectre be rendered visible. Due to their unique physical structure, any living being touched by Spectre instantly dies from visceral freezing, with even the skin being burned and corroded by absolute zero. However, these fearsome war machines suddenly lost control one day. They not only killed their creators but also began to inflict cruelty throughout the entire city. Even the military suffered heavy casualties from Spectre's attacks. Helpless, the top brass immediately sought out Dr. Klein, the chief scientist of the military. He is the inventor of hyperspectral imaging, the technology that allows one to see Spectre. Initially, the technical staff thought the Spectre images were just ordinary interference signals. It wasn't until a soldier captured a video of Spectre actively attacking humans just before his death that Fran from the intelligence agency suspected it might be a form of stealth technology. The enemy may be wearing camouflaged clothing. Klein immediately rejected this assumption, as it couldn't explain the strange cause of the soldiers' deaths. Though Klein doesn't yet know what's going on, he believes that everything strange can ultimately be explained through science. To deduce the specific form of Spectre, Klein needs more research data. Klein brought a hyperspectral camera that can capture Spectre's movements clearly. So, Klein immediately installed it on an armored vehicle. Once everything was ready, a special forces unit began escorting Klein to the location where Spectre was discovered. Now the entire city has turned into a wasteland. When they arrived at their destination, the soldiers immediately split into teams of 4 and began a thorough search of the high-rise buildings where Spectre was suspected to be hiding. Meanwhile, Klein and Fran remained in the armored vehicle, monitoring the situation through the images relayed by the soldiers. As the soldiers advanced, they soon discovered the lifeless bodies of their comrades, the eerie cause of death clearly pointing to Spectre's attack method. This made the search team even more cautious. Subsequently, as the soldiers continued their search, they stumbled upon an unusual spectral phenomenon under a bathtub. When the team carefully lifted the tub, they found a missing soldier hiding inside. The soldier's face displayed profound fear. He recounted how everyone from the team had been killed in Spectre's attack, and he had only survived by hiding beneath the bathtub. Simultaneously, another search team had discovered deceased soldiers. As they moved forward to investigate, they noticed a dimly lit room at the end of the corridor. A soldier, protected by his teammates, prepared to investigate. However, as soon as he stepped into the room, Klein immediately noticed something abnormal within it. In the very center of the room, there was a shifting white shadow. When the soldier removed his hyperspectral goggles, the apparition before his eyes instantly vanished. The terrified soldier hastily put his goggles back on. Following Captain Marco's orders, the soldiers opened fire. However, their weapons had no effect on the target as the bullets passed through the shadow's form. Spectre retaliated with an invisible shockwave, incapacitating the soldiers, who fell lifeless to the ground. Observing his comrade's sacrifice, Captain Marco ordered everyone to switch to heavy ammunition, determined to take down Spectre. However, before the soldiers could locate their target, they were met with a ferocious Spectre attack. The soldiers had no power to resist under this kind of attack, and in just a moment they were deprived of their lives by the Spectre, watching their companions dying around them. At this point, the soldiers finally saw the Spectre's trail, so they immediately opened fire. However, although the hyperspectral goggles could see the Spectre, the weapons in the soldiers' hands couldn't damage it. Their attacks further enraged Spectre. Seeing his men continuously falling, Klein urgently advised Captain Marco to issue a retreat order. While Captain Marco was still hesitating, the soldiers at the front line could no longer hold out. In the face of heavy casualties, one soldier resorted to using a high-explosive grenade, but this widespread attack proved futile against Spectre. Captain Marco immediately ordered a retreat, yet Spectre had no intention of letting them go. They relentlessly pursued the soldiers. The panicked soldiers prepared to escape through the windows. Just as the last soldier was about to rappel down, he saw a specter charging directly towards him. What happened next completely stunned everyone because Spectre had defied the laws of physics. It could move freely through the air. This was a baffling phenomenon that defied scientific explanation. Humans couldn't perceive them with the naked eye. Only hyperspectral imaging could reveal their presence. Witnessing these enigmatic beings resembling Spectre, Klein, who had always put his faith in science, couldn't help but hesitate. Upon seeing this situation, Captain Marco immediately picked up a rocket launcher and charged out. Klein, observing the scene, hastily pointed out the location of Spectre. Captain Marco swiftly aimed at the target and fired a rocket. After the smoke cleared, Klein immediately turned his attention back to the hyperspectral imaging. To their surprise, Spectre remained unscathed under this attack, and Captain Marco had fallen victim to Spectre's retaliation. Just as Klein was at a loss for what to do next, more soldiers descended from the high-rise buildings. Their appearance quickly diverted Spectre's attention. Watching their comrades fall one by one, the panicked soldiers swiftly retreated into the armored vehicle. Their top priority now was to leave this place as quickly as possible. However, as the armored vehicles were in transit, they unfortunately encountered enemy-planted landmines. 2 armored vehicles were flipped over by the explosions. The surviving soldiers immediately disembarked from the wreckage, but without transportation, returning to the base was no longer feasible. Their immediate concern was to find a new refuge. The team quickly sought shelter in a nearby factory, where they would wait for support from headquarters. However, Spectre could attack at any moment, and most of the soldiers' hyperspectral goggles were damaged from the previous battle. Klein quickly devised a plan. He instructed the soldiers to locate a vantage point and aim the hyperspectral camera outside. As the instrument powered up, they realized that the factory was completely surrounded by Spectre. Strangely, Spectre did not attempt to breach the facility. Upon further observation, the soldiers noticed a peculiar defensive line outside the factory that hindered Spectre whenever they attempted to cross it. Then one of the soldiers remembered that he had fallen there during the evacuation. When the soldier picks out the black grit left on his glove, Klein recognizes it as ordinary iron filings. Someone had deliberately encircled the factory with iron filings, creating a barrier that prevented Spectre from invading. Klein concluded that someone who knew the truth about Spectre had placed these iron filings. There might still be others hiding in the vicinity, so the soldiers initiated a thorough search of the entire building. They quickly discovered their targets in one room, but they turned out to be just 2 ordinary children. Klein inquired and learned that the iron filings around the factory were scattered by the children's father. Sadly, he had been killed by Spectre while setting up the barrier. Although no useful clues were obtained from the children, Klein found a map on their father's body. It marked a location called Masarovi, where the initial Spectre killings had occurred. Shortly thereafter, the soldiers finally succeeded in contacting the base, and a helicopter rescue mission was scheduled for early tomorrow morning. Headquarters also promised to send tanks to ensure their safety, but there's still a problem. The place where the plane landed is 800 meters from the factory. How can they break through the Spectre's encirclement at this distance? While everyone was arguing about this, Klein suddenly realized that there was still a lot of iron filings inside the factory. He immediately conceived a plan. Klein instructed the soldiers to collect glass bottles from the room and fill them to the brim with iron filings. Then, they filled the bottlenecks with C4 explosives and sealed them with tape. Since conventional hand grenades were now ineffective, they detached the hand grenade switches and attached them to the glass bottles, creating improvised high-explosive devices. Using this method, the soldiers quickly produced a substantial amount of improvised weaponry, even converting their ammunition to high-explosive rounds filled with iron filings. On the other side, Klein was also working tirelessly. He began modifying the hyperspectral camera into a searchlight, allowing all the soldiers to see Spectre clearly. He then relayed the modification instructions to headquarters, so the incoming support forces would also be equipped with the same devices. Once everything was ready, morning had arrived. However, a vigilant sentry soldier noticed movement in the building across from the factory. Klein swiftly retrieved the searchlight, as the beam of light illuminated the ruins on the opposite side. What happened next utterly terrified everyone. Spectre, unable to breach the ground barrier, had managed to leap to the adjacent high-rise building. With a full-on charge, Spectre descended upon them. Seeing Spectre's menacing approach, the team had no choice but to initiate an early evacuation. However, as they emerged outside, Spectre had already detected their movements and quickly advanced towards them. A soldier reacted by launching a high-explosive device, but it was difficult to target Spectre in its rapid movement. Seeing that the first few rounds of artillery failed to hit, the soldiers simply hit the high explosive shells directly to the ground. The ensuing iron filings scattered and finally had an impact, momentarily immobilizing Specter. The team members immediately sprinted toward the evacuation point, but as time passed, Specter eventually broke free from its confinement and resumed pursuit. This time, however, the soldiers were prepared. Although it was challenging to hit Specter in its high-speed movement, the high-explosive devices, once detonated, covered a large area, and the iron filings within significantly slowed down Specter's pace. Using this method, they managed to advance rapidly toward the evacuation point, continuously firing high-explosive devices to deter Specter from getting too close. As the battle escalated, more and more Specter began trailing behind. Soon, a soldier in the rear was killed by Specter, but the team couldn't afford to pause, as the intense explosions would attract even more Specter. Seeing the Specter closing in from behind, the soldiers immediately launched a barrage of high-explosive devices. The dense iron filings instantly formed a temporary barrier, halting Specter's pursuit for the time being. Finally, the team successfully reached the evacuation point. However, at that moment, Klein's makeshift searchlight began to flicker. After continuous high-intensity operation, the makeshift modification had short-circuited. While the soldiers were in despair, a rumbling sound suddenly rang out. All eyes turned to the source of the noise, revealing the most powerful human war machine slowly approaching. It turned out that reinforcements from the base had arrived just in time, and they were all equipped with hyperspectral searchlights. Soon, 3 tanks arrived at the central square. As the soldiers opened hyperspectral searchlights, they realized that the entire square had been surrounded by Specter. Looking at those stupid figures, the tanks immediately began to adjust their positions. A bomb was launched directly at Specter, and the deafening explosion knocked the soldiers to the ground. However, this was only the beginning of the tank's assault. With a continuous barrage of artillery shells, the entire high-rise building was eventually reduced to rubble. As soon as the square was calm again, support soldiers rushed in. As the smoke dissipated, it was clear that Specter had not suffered any damage. Seeing Specter rapidly advancing, the soldiers opened fire, but their conventional bullets couldn't hit the elusive beings, especially as Specter could navigate terrain effortlessly. Specter rushes into the crowd like a god of death. In the face of this relentless attack, the soldiers were helpless, and casualties quickly mounted. One Specter charged directly at a tank, but for some inexplicable reason, this time, Specter failed to penetrate the tank's armor. Klein seemed to have an idea. The attacking Specter were also enraged, and the Specter began to repeatedly ram the tanks. While Specter couldn't directly kill the soldiers inside, the powerful impacts quickly reduced the tank to a pile of scrap metal. The tank's searchlight also became useless. As Specter faded back into invisibility, they resumed their onslaught against the soldiers. Just as the team was on the brink of annihilation, support in the form of a helicopter finally arrived. The soldiers immediately began evacuating toward the helicopter. However, Specter was slowed down by the helicopter's airflow. Their advance significantly impeded. In this critical moment, Klein thought of a solution. He threw all the glass bottles he had onto the ground. Under the powerful wind generated by the helicopter's rotor blades, the iron filings inside the bottles scattered in all directions. Specter, attempting to charge through, was also affected. Seizing this opportunity, everyone quickly boarded the helicopter. As the helicopter ascended, they had finally escaped. However, before everyone could recover, the aircraft suddenly received a signal. The base had fallen. Countless Specter were wreaking havoc throughout the city. Each flash of white light on the ground represented another human life claimed by Specter. Consequently, the helicopter had to divert to a shelter. Shortly after, General Orland arrived at the shelter. Following the attack on the base, all communication systems were disrupted by Specter interference. General Orland ordered the soldiers to disperse and evacuate. General Orland took all the equipment he could carry and led some of the soldiers to break the back. But in the end, there were less than 20 men left in the platoon, and now the signal has been jammed by Specter. They've lost all contact with the outside world. And on the other side, Klein had found the girl again. After closely observing Specter and gathering more information from the girl, he had developed a rough hypothesis. The girl shared that her father had been a potter, crafting special containers in Mazarov. Specter had originated from a power plant in that area. With all the clues pieced together, Klein finally deduced what Spectre truly was. He immediately sought out General Orland. The sole survivor found hiding in a bathtub had escaped Spectre's attack. Furthermore, Spectre couldn't penetrate either the bathtub or the tank's surface because they were coated with porcelain. Spectre, therefore, wasn't a naturally occurring phenomenon. It paralleled a hypothetical state in physics proposed by Einstein. Aside from the three common states of matter, solid, liquid, and gas, this fourth state was the Bose-Einstein condensate. Beck exhibited some highly anomalous properties, including the ability to be slowed down by iron filings, pass through walls but not porcelain, and cause instant death to any life forms it touched due to its extremely low temperature. All these traits aligned with Spectre's behavior. However, synthesizing a Bose-Einstein condensate required immense energy, which happened to be available at the Mazarov power plant. Since BEC was artificially created, it couldn't evade the laws of nature. A plasma discharge gun could effectively neutralize it. So, just like last time, Klein instructed the soldiers to immediately dismantle the supplies brought by General Orland and gather any usable parts from the shelter. They urgently needed to manufacture plasma weapons to stop the situation from deteriorating further. As BEC could continually draw energy from its surroundings, the number of Spectre would multiply exponentially. It would eventually become a catastrophe for all of humanity. With relentless effort, they finally succeeded in creating plasma discharge guns. These weapons emitted focused energy pulses capable of disintegrating BEC. When everything was ready, the soldiers geared up. The most perilous battle lay ahead. Accompanied by the helicopter's rapid advance, they quickly arrived at the Mazarov power plant. Captain Sessions was the first to touch down on the ground. After ensuring the immediate surroundings were secure, the other soldiers rapidly descended. In the end, they deployed a massive robotic dog equipped with hyperspectral searchlights on its back. This allowed the soldiers to clearly see Spectre's traces. Subsequently, the team immediately began advancing toward the nuclear power plant. However, as they reached the entrance, they saw a large gathering of Spectres there. The soldiers promptly retrieved their plasma discharge rifles. As Captain Sessions aimed the rifle, the peculiar and otherworldly Spectres, surpassing human comprehension, became aware of their presence. These were Spectres beyond anything known to humanity, and their existence had been artificially created. As the Spectres were about to launch an attack, the commander decisively activated the plasma discharge rifle. A powerful energy pulse was unleashed toward the Spectres, and in the moment of impact, their forms disintegrated into dust. The powerful aftermath of the explosion stirred up dust in the sky. The shock of witnessing the unparalleled power of the plasma weapon left Captain Sessions wearing an expression of disbelief. This was the first Spectre they had truly eradicated. Seeing that Klein's deduction was indeed accurate, Captain Sessions immediately ordered full-scale action. All the soldiers began to land quickly, and now they were going to take over the nuclear power plant. Humanity engaged in combat with the Spectres, while the soldiers temporarily held back the Spectres. Another team stealthily infiltrated the power plant. Their objective was to explore the power plant's interior and uncover the specific cause of the Spectre's appearance. However, as this team entered the nuclear power plant, a Spectre emerged from the shadows. The soldiers reacted quickly and initiated an attack. Yet, within the confined indoor space, the Spectres exhibited increased agility, rendering the soldiers' attacks ineffective. Seeing that the Spectres were relentless in their attacks, the soldiers urged Klein to depart from the area first. They needed to find the laboratory quickly, otherwise, they wouldn't be able to eliminate the Spectres in this place. Continuing his advance, Klein soon encountered a sealed door. His companion Fran, well prepared, effortlessly opened it. Inside, they discovered a concealed laboratory, but the floor was littered with corpses. With Klein's flashlight scanning ahead, they observed numerous containers containing dormant Spectres. However, these Spectres appeared incomplete, not yet fully formed. As Klein continued his exploration, he stumbled upon numerous X-ray images, all displaying the anatomical structures of human bodies. It became evident that the laboratory had been using molecular-level equipment to scan and reproduce human bodies using the condensate state. By the time Klein got to the innermost room, he saw countless containers, and inside each of them was now a Spectre. But what surprised Klein most was that these Spectres seemed to be self-aware. When they saw Klein coming here, they all looked over curiously. This is an impossible characteristic of ordinary condensed matter. There's no telling what happened here. Half the containers are now broken. It seemed that the Spectres outside had indeed originated from this laboratory. In the same room, Klein discovered a device, which, when activated using an ID card he had found, turned out to be an emergency shutdown mechanism for the specters. Disconnecting the energy supply between the machine and the specters would halt their neural activity. So Klein went into action, just as Klein was desperately disconnecting all the links. Outside the nuclear power plant, the war between humans and specters had escalated into a full-blown conflict. Although the soldiers' weapons could counter the specters, as the specters recklessly charged forward, they quickly infiltrated the human ranks. Under the close-quarter attacks of the specters, humans were losing their lives in an instant. Fortunately, responding soldiers launched a counterattack, and soon, the specters infiltrating their ranks were slain. As the soldiers continued to advance, they killed more and more specters. When the last specter was killed, it even showed a fearful expression before perishing, just as it seemed that all the specters in the vicinity had been eliminated. A new situation suddenly emerged. The specters that had previously been killed began to reassemble themselves, while the soldiers reacted swiftly and initiated another round of attacks. The specters' close-quarter assaults resulted in immediate casualties among the soldiers. As the specters continued to merge, they quickly formed into a colossal specter storm. Under the relentless onslaught of the specters, the soldiers were left utterly defenseless. And now, even energy weapons are ineffective against the specter. As soldiers continued to sacrifice themselves, the situation on the scene had completely spiraled out of control. Captain Sessions rushed to collect all the weapons scattered on the battlefield, just as the soldiers' last line of defense was broken down. At this moment, Captain Sessions was also prepared and ready, with all the plasma weapons activated simultaneously. A powerful energy pulse was sent directly toward the Spectre storm. A series of intense explosions erupted. Even the Spectre containers inside the nuclear power plant were shattered, and the imprisoned Spectres burst out. The Spectre storm remained intact amidst the explosion, and countless Spectres started to rush toward the soldiers. At this critical juncture, Klein finally managed to disconnect all the instruments. As the Spectres lost their energy connections, their bodies exploded, with Klein collapsing heavily to the ground. It seemed as though these Spectres had been paused. They all remained suspended in midair, motionless, as the condensate states that composed their bodies continually disintegrated. All the Spectres eventually dissipated into thin air. Once everything had returned to calm, Klein found a concealed room beneath the instruments. It was then that he finally discovered the truth behind the birth of the Spectres. Each Spectre actually represented a human being. The creators had placed living human beings into experimental chambers to give the Spectres a sense of self-awareness. These humans had their bodies transformed into Spectres, while their brains remained here. This was why Spectres displayed human emotions. Observing the brainwave patterns displayed on the instruments, Klein realized that even though their bodies had died, their brains and nerves had continued to endure excruciating pain. So Klein immediately cut off the energy supply to the lab module. The brains inside soon followed the ashes, though this was an invention of tremendous historical significance. Humanity's first encounter with it came through war. Following this, Klein destroyed all the experimental data in the facility. Someday in the future, if condensed matter is actually discovered, let's hope it's for the benefit of mankind and not to create killing.